But anyway, today what we have the second set of lesbian stories now by Sigrid Gayangos. Earlier we were talking outside at breakfast, and I asked her how many workshops, writers workshops, she had been to, and this is the fourth writers workshop she's been to, and I was wondering if she had also submitted lesbian stories or lesbian themed work in the other workshops. So maybe you can share a little bit about that before we start with
my lesbian stories.
No, I mean your workshop.
Sige. So the first workshop I attended was ALE. I was batchmates with Reedy. It was a young adult workshop, specifically young adult. And then after that, I submitted to Siliman and Ateneo. And my stories in Siliman were mostly magical realist stories. And then the stories were not thematically gay. And then, what? and then just a few months ago, in April, I was in IAS with Sir John. I submitted a lesbian story and another magical realist story, and then this one, so two.
So how do you resolve that the impulse, the writing impulse, since you don't limit yourself to the lesbian material? I mean, where does the writing impulse come from? How do you
Because I do not identify exclusively as a lesbian. For me, attraction is attraction. So, yeah, I get attracted to males, females, and then it's almost, it doesn't matter to me.
So queer.
So queer, yes.
So you would be comfortable with queer and fans. Okay. Anything else?
No, and having said it,
Okay. Maybe later after the discussion. Thanks, Sigrid. Actually, hindi ko naman siya sinabihan na mag-prepare or what, no? Katulad ng iba na sinabing, medyo sinabihan na mag-prepare. I just wanted to put that context because nga, so far, we've been talking about yung issue ng who gets to write about what topics. So, kanina pinag-uusapan nga, yun nga. So, pag si Sigrid ba na queer woman writer ay nagsulat ng heterosexual story, ina-appropriate ba niya yung identity ng mga heterosexuals and does she even think about it, di ba? Parang, why is it that when you're writing, for instance, why is it such an issue for some of us, no? Probably not all of us, no? na yung identity natin, ipoprotect natin. So, maybe that's obviously that's something that's negotiable. But I think particularly for marginalized identities, no? We don't want others to be speaking for us because we have our own voices. But again, it's something that is probably for some more of a personal matter, for others more of a political matter. But that's I thought that was interesting to learn about Sigrid, that in fact the other part of her is a speculative fiction writer. Is that right? Which is not particularly concerned with her sexual or gender identities. So, just a nice point to I think to raise, no, at this point in our workshop. Kasi parang naka-highlight talaga naman, no? Dahil yung workshop natin ay LGBTQ writing workshop or writers workshop, sobrang naka-highlight yung sexual identities natin dito sa workshop na to, which is probably something that doesn't happen in, let's say, Siliman Writers. Sinong fellows, alumni ng Siliman Writers Workshop? Ayan, so halos ganyan. And hindi naman talaga pinag-uusapan yung mga, meron bang times, I don't know if meron kayong experience na ang talagang pinag-uusapan doon sa Siliman, for instance, na Writers Workshop, ay yung identity politics. Parang nung time namin, 1996 na nag-Siliman workshop ako, wala namang ganung mga usapan, no? So, in fact, I submitted a lesbian story to that workshop in 1996, and walang sinabi tungkol sa, sa sexual politics ng story. Ang pinag-uusapan ay craft. Yan, no? Pinag-uusapan yung craft. As if it's really divorced from the politics of the piece. And I guess at that time, we were innocent. Parang craft naman talaga yung pinag-uusapan. Parang gano'n, we just accepted that that was it. And just a little sharing before we go to your stories. Last round, we have a graduate of the UP Mindanao creative writing program who submitted nonfiction, and it was lesbian essay, or memoir, whatever you like to call it. And one of the panelists apparently refused to talk about it. Really, totally did not discuss the essay. And I don't know personally about it. I just heard the writer herself tell me the story. And she felt now invisible because refused talaga to talk about it. And then one of the panelists said now that no matter how beautifully you write it, if the topic is ugly, you can save it.
Ganon?
My ganon?
Sino yan?
My ganon? Or how was it? Ikaw meron kang actual experience. How was that expressed? Did you hear that said?
It was phrased. It said that writing about it well does not make something wrong right.
Yeah. Okay, so there. You heard it? Did you hear it? I don't know if it's worse or better, but I kind of paraphrase, but that's how I remember the way
I
it was
will
told.
write this to the person who said it in the group chat.
May cheesy na. Bakit hindi kasama yung mga...
I'm sure they were talking about you.
I hope you're saying nice things about us. Okay, so...
Was he the one who requested an affidavit of proof?
Oh my God! May ganon?
Okay, bakit ba?
Iba pa. So, writing it well, ano sabi,
Writing it well does not make something wrong right.
Yan.
What?
Isipin natin. So, hindi ba nandito siya at the heart of the LGBTQ Writers Workshop is really that resistance, no, to that kind of narrative about our existence being wrong.
Yeah.
And in fact, why are we writing about it? And so, gusto natin i-assert yun. So, I think, kaya ko tinanong din si Sigrid about her experience at Siliman. And yun nga, sabi niya, yung kanyang works sa Siliman ay yung speculative work that is not necessarily lesbian, but could be read as lesbian. Would you say?
At least yung one of the protagonists, I imagine her as being queer.
But it was never referred to at that workshop. Yeah. So may ganong level ng invisibility. So dito sa atin, sobra siyang, dito naman, it's really highlighted. And rightly so. No? So para sa atin, kasi ito yung, I think it's the center of our existence as human beings, you know. And so the writing of it really does play a major role in our, I guess, in how we imagine our own lives to be. So, dito sa works ni Sigrid, eto nga, definitely, clearly lesbian protagonists. So, and para sa akin, the first story is way more accomplished than the second story. But I'll let you, of course, start with your own thoughts about the two stories. Sabi ni Ralph, magpa-summarize daw ako sa sila. Kasi sa Double Writers Workshop, we ask the fellows to summarize the story, especially the long stories. Kasi parang mapilitan sila na magbabasa. So, dito hindi tayo nagpapasummarize. O sige, summarize daw yung Remnants of Summer in 3 sentences. Sige. Sino nagpasa?
Yeah.
Oo. At dahil si Ralph pag nag-suggest. Si Ralph. Sige.
Wabinga na raw yung pangalan.
Wabinga. Forever.
Well, the way I read it, parang
Ay, gusto mo na ba?
it's it is a story about Alex and I forgot.
Tin.
Yeah. Alex visited Zamboanga, and then parang they arranged for a day tour sa isang island. Tapos, parang layered siya because may mga, ano pala siya, may mga, you hurt me, something like that. And then it ended na, it ended na parang Tin said na, I'll just let you join another day tour group and I'll get a
Bakit kaya?
At lumawi siya.
Oo, bakit kaya? Ganun mo ano. At ano sa palagay mo yung conflict?
Mamakala ko sama nila.
Alam mo naman ako, leading the witness, di ba? So, ayan, I'm leading the witness.
I don't know. Maybe meron sila kasi there was a mention about they met in Manila before and then siguro may mga unfinished business silang dalawa and ganun siguro yung parang naging texture ng story. Tapos, dire-diretso na lang na.
Oh, hindi.
What I like about the story, the Remnants of Summer, is number one, the imagery, the landscape, the diction, the sashaying, in more words. Kasi I'm a sucker for of Lon's stories na super duper landscape, and then yun lang.
So the setting?
Yeah,
You
yes.
like the way the setting is rendered?
Yes po, the direction.
In a sachet
Sachet manner.
Okay.
Sini Bruce daw.
Can I just make a comment? Because this is very important, no? The story is really very simple. It's a reunion of two former lovers. It is the politics of the relationship that you have to look at. One is self-centered, selfish, and the other one is or feels like she's being used. That kind of undercurrent sa relationship niya. And so Tintin eventually took the final step. I'm not going to take this anymore. Let me off. Nung mga ganun. So, along the way, I mean, you have already a lot of indications that the relationship is not going to work out. That's the politics. It's just not it's very clear. It's very clear. And Alex is that kind of person. She's a user.
Yeah.
She's a user. And in relationships, you might have to consider, are you being used? Is this an equal relationship? Are you giving and taking at the same time? Or are you just giving and the other side is taking and taking? And if you find yourself under that circumstance, you better get out because you will never be happy. It's a simple story, the realization, and finally the courage of the protagonist to say enough is enough. That's it. It's a simple story. It's a realization story. It's a story of epiphany, probably, or she realized this a long time ago. There is already, feeling that was happening, but she could not say no, and so to say no finally is her growing up. It's a simple story.
So it's like an initiation story, a story of decision.
Yeah.
Nori?
Yeah. Minsan kasi,
yung pinakasimple, yung mas malaki ang impact. Doon sa nagbabasa. So, and para sa akin, ito yung ganitong klaseng story. Parang, the selfish reader in me would like to know more about lesbian relations. Ano yung sinasabi ni Jimmy na sexual politics? Sa isang lesbian relations, kasi we've read about the ATM type relationship between male gays, di ba? Pero ako, yun nga, kaya sabi ko, ito yung wala eh, ito yung missing, this is what we want to read and declare to the world na meron din ganitong struggles, no? Ang lesbian relations, ang isang lesbiana. Kaya, strong, ambivalent ako after reading it. Parang, okay, I get it. User this. So, meron din pala silang gano'n, yung babae na user sa relasyon. So, ang pumapasok sa utak ko yung manga. No, maraming ganyan na mga manga gamit. Masyado ng bago yan. So, manga. So, may mga ganyan. At yan ay matalas na topic din ng mga bakla. No? So, kaya lang, yun nga eh. Hindi ko alam kung dito, kaya ako ambivalent, parang ang sabi ko dito, I would have wanted a full love story or sexual politics story. Pero yun nga, that's one side. On the other hand, parang, okay, enough na ito, parang ganyan. Pero that's what I will be missing. Or maybe I will be looking forward to other lesbian stories. Parang, ano ba sila? Meron bang confrontational din nasa sa loob ng relasyon? Tapos, ano yun nga, balik ako dun, yung sexual politics sa lesbian relation. Wala akong, and hindi, huwag na lang. Baka TMI na.
Oh, sige.
Wag daw.
Kasi namin yung TMI.
Hindi, lasingin mo muna. Lasingin mo muna.
Kailangan pa ng beer.
Too much information.
Ang isa pa, we're talking about remnants of summer, di ba?
Yes.
Hindi, ay isa po pang comment. Like yung kay Andrew, yun lang yung mga natatandaan ko. No? Yung paglalagay din hindi lang yung local color o yung environment, pero yung, tama ba? Ito yung, may nalagay ako dito yung the global, yung the local. Yung paano nag-change yung city, meron ng Save More, meron ng ganyan. Pero, and she actually stated it, no? Still, it is the city I choose to live in, the only city where she can find me. Parang nag-iiba na yung environment, na nagiging urban na siya. No? Pero nandito pa rin ako sa ganitong klaseng relasyon. Yan yung reading.
Yeah, so you're seeing that the setting is not just being used to, randomly, that it says there's a necessity for this particular city to be used in the story, and that it's not stuck in time. Even though it's provincia, it's dynamic.
And I think yun din yung magandang talagang aralin ng mga writers, yung paano magiging seamless, yung pag-incorporate mo ng social and economic, even political environment and happenings or thinking na nangyayari. Yung seamlessly na i-incorporate mo siya doon sa iniisip ng character mo, na hindi ka nagle-lecture kasi yun yung laging sinasabi sa atin ng mga experts. No, na, ito nag-editorialize, maririnig ninyo yan. Or nagtuturo na ito, or nagle-lecture na ito. Yun yung ayaw na ayaw ng mga readers sa ganyan. So, I think dito na-accomplish naman yun. And dun sa iba ding akda, meron ganun attempts. No? So, yun yung isang tingin ko strength. It presents to us yung context ng relasyon na meron. Kaya siguro din naghahanap ako nung ano ba talaga nangyari. No? Kasi I get it, no? User si Alex, pero ano ba talaga yung nangyayari?
May siya. Nauna si Gayangos.
Okay, so ba't yung stylistic choice ni Sigrid na i-italize yung dialogue instead of controlling information marks? Waves, when I was reading it, I was thinking of waves. Kasi may ganong feeling yung melody ng pagkukanto. Tapos pertaining to the characters, sabi ko kay Sigrid, gusto kong pag-utugin yung dalawang characters. Kasi yung isa, person A is si Alex, sobrang manggagamit. Pero si Tin naman, ulaga. Kasi nagpapagamit. Pero nung ending, nagustuhan ko yung part na yun kasi she was able to remove herself from that situation. Kaya lang dun sa end, I highlighted something na on the last paragraph, Tin said that, but there's something about this island that allows me to extricate myself from her. I was hoping it wasn't there because Tin earned it. She didn't need an external force to affect her to arrive to that decision. So kita mo naman yung journey there. I was hoping na Tin owned that decision. She didn't need anything else to do that. You know, so yung image of ocean na dinala na si Alex sa ocean within her room. Tapos the presence of that image is consistent in the story. I think na nakadagdag siya sa beauty of the story.
I don't know, did you miss the triggering incident? The very important incident. Kaya dahil low-key masyadong presentation, baka hindi mo nakuha ang meaning. They were in this shop, and suddenly, Alex kept looking, ito, ang ganda nito, oh. Parang memory ng Zamboanga, yung earrings na mother of pearl. At saka, hindi niya bibilin. Si Tin ang bibili. Binili ni Tin, at saka nilagay ang box sa bag. Yun, hindi mo yun nakita. Alex way of, getting Tin to spend for her. You know, hindi lang pera. Ito gusto ko. Oh, ang ganda nito. But you will not buy. You buy it for me. Finally, Tintin grew up and got wise. Oh my God, I will keep doing this. But she bought it. It's not the waves. It's not the external, the environment that, you know. It is this action. You have to.
That's why I said I was hoping it wasn't there because she already earned that decision. She already, nandun na sa loob na yun.
Oh, from the very beginning.
From the beginning.
Meron siya.
From the beginning.
But you have to have a triggering incident. Talaga, sabi mo, this is it. This is it. Wala na. Puno na ako.
Yeah.
But it's so quiet. In fact, the first time I read it, I didn't realize that it was that crucial. And in the end, I thought, bakit naman siya lumayo? Bakit naman siya suddenly nag-change na ang mood? Oh, we have a group, you can stay in that hotel, you can, do this and do that. Parang, anong nagawa ni Alex? And then I went back, sabi ko, sometimes, yung the way people manipulate you are so subtle that hindi mo alam that you are already being manipulated. But even then, si Tintin, right from the very beginning, sensed that one-sidedness in the relationship. There was a time when Zamboanga was under siege and she needed help and she needed comfort, and she reached out to Alex and not a word. For many years, did not hear from her. And suddenly, text or whatever, Tintin, I'm going to Zamboanga. And then she had to be pulled out of her schedule. You have to make way for her. When you have when you come across that kind of relationship, so exhausting. You don't own your life. It's somebody else making a schedule for you, doing all sorts of demands, saying, you do this, you do that, you do this, you do that. When you come across that kind of relationship, this is about writing, but bring this to your own lives. Get away. Get away. No, maski na, no matter how attractive the person is, no, get away.
Pero, yeah, I agree.
Feels
You actually,
Because Alex is so beautiful.
yeah, yung sinasabi na user si Alex, pero hindi, sa akin hindi masyadong strong yung kanyang pag-user. Kaya ako gusto yung kwento. Kasi ang subtle, very, yung manipulative siya. Hindi siya user in the sense na bili mo ko dito, bili mo ko niyan. Yung stereotypical na nanggagamit talaga na type na babae o lalaki, di ba? Why not? So, pero ang maganda dun is, napaka-subtle lang, tapos ikaw, ginagawa mo yung gusto niyang gawin mo. Hindi niya ikaw kailangan sabihan. And that's what I thought was beautiful about that particular scene. And it wasn't, for me, it wasn't like an epiphanic moment. Kasi from the beginning, alam na niya eh. Doon sa Walker Siege pa lang, alam na niya eh. So it's just like, parang dito, yun na lang yung parang physical manifestation na walang pag-asa to. Kasi I think, umaasa pa rin siya, pero there's a part of her na umaasa, na baka naman nagbago na after all these years. And it is this particular scene, maybe, that makes her certain na, ay, hindi ito nagbago. Ganun pa rin siya. And so, gusto niya i-confront about the past. So, it's really that. And when you think about it, ang mura lang naman yung lyrics na yan, di ba? Parang 50 pesos lang yung mother of lyrics, parang ganun sa
Symbolic,
pero ang bigat ng kanyang ibig sabihin or significance. Right?
I think kaya din nagustuhan ko yung kwento dahil a story of codependency na nakaka-relate yung aming sa akin dito. Kasi very quiet niya eh. Ibig sabihin ay abusive yung isa naman nagpapapuso in very quiet ways na may consent to a large extent. So may agency sila and it's a loop. So tatawag din sa kanya si Alex flash forward 10 years from now and it's likely going to reenact, the scene will be reenacted all over again. And for a certain kind of nostalgia, kasi ang choice ko lang naman, this codependency or nothing. So you'd rather reenact this scene rather than have nothing to look forward to. So parang very complex yung very quiet. Yun nga lang yung last line na never look back. Masyado namang
Hindi ka naniniwala.
Chika nga lang eh. Parang all others ambivalence na nag-work. Pagkas bigla nila meron something final again. Na syempre hindi naman ito literal lang na nagsiswing siya towards another direction, etc. But it's also figurative. Pero hindi ko ma-take yung ganong klaseng value for the complexity of repeating itself. It's a repeating scene, I think. Na parang naiintindihan naman natin kung bakit kailangan i-repeat itong scene na ito. Kasi nga, wala pang pumapasok na bago. In exchange for as kind of surrogate for this scene. It's a great love to begin with. Much in the same way yung abuse, well, it's also abusive. Battered women, you can't get out of a relationship with men, or drugs, for example, or well, it's ano naman natin to begin with abusive, pero on the other hand, wala kang choice eh. Wala kang love life or meron kang abusive love life. And people would rather go for that kind of violence, acceptance of violence, tolerance of violence, rather than nothing coming into their lives. So, yun yung wager ng kwento na to. Kaya sa akin, successful, except for that last line.
Actually, consistent Tama din, no? Kasi consistent siya dun sa image ng waves. Kasi nabanggit ni Bruce na parang there's something wave-like about the way the story is told. Yung waves, hindi din siya dumadating sa point na never look back, di ba? Balik lang siya ng balik. So parang kung tama, maganda yung point din ni Roland na baka yung ending niya is na hindi siya consistent doon sa well, the metaphor, no, of the sea and the waves, and as well as, of course, the nature of codependent relationships. So na, malapit na mag-TMI, kaya pigilan niyo na ako. Kung bakit love na love your story na to. Gusto na magsalita ni Ibrahim.
Just
Bigyan niyo yung mic para ano.
Sa group message na lang
Mendos, may GC din ang panel.
Ba't wala ako doon sa GC? Ako talaga yung pinag-uusapan ko. Yes, Ibrahim.
Ko-comment na lang po ako and then I'll extend it to the next story na lang po. Pero speaking as someone who was born and raised in Zamboanga, I can say na the imagery and the place is on point, and then of course we're all on the same page naman po about. Pero I really like how the descriptions are well placed. Kaya parang konting layer, parang unti-unti mo siyang kinukuha little facts about themselves, not just parang about the place but the personalities of the characters. And I like, of course, how she connects that yung perhaps she's thinking this is a city unsure of itself because that's what Tin is, parang ganun. Yes, and agree ako kay Sir Rolando na parang she could have made it final sa last line. Pero it's not within my culture, pero I really thought that she was going to, di ba may sa seawater, there's a cleansing ritual na ginagawa na parang once you go back to the shore, you're cleansed and you're healed properties. Parang siguro ganun. Pero it's about the ocean din yung next story.
Yeah.
So siguro sa sobrang lamoy niya naging ocean. Pero sa po, I like the contrast between the two stories because dito sa first story, the love is unsure, pero they're close together. Pero the next story, the love is sure but they're oceans apart. So pero at saka yung sa konting history placed here and there, parang sprinkled siya pero well placed. Yun lang.
Yun yung sabi ni Nori, no, na parang seamless yung pag-incorporate ng context doon sa personal. Sige, sige.
Hi, okay, so Remnants of Summer really resonated with me because I have been, because I have been both in a affair, but and because the protagonist was Finn, it was entirely from her point of view, the viewpoint of the relationship and what its effects on her are. I was left a bit wanting from the side of Alex because it's a lot more complicated than just I want this earring or this girl is mukhang nagpapagamit, so I'm gonna use her. It's not just that. And I wish that even though the protagonist was the one na nagagamit, that it was a little bit more touched on in the scenes that reference their past together. Which is why I'm gonna go into the second story. I also love the second story because it was a break from something that was very real to something that was a little more aspirational. I love the love there is unquestionable. And I love that each of them were cultivating something. With Patty, it was the plants, and with Astra, it was her work under the sea. And it was both towards saving the world, which in this sci-fi world seems very like it's about to end. And there was a reference, I think, to like they have to move to another planet. I love that that was a device that made it clear that love is about cultivation.
Yeah.
So, there.
Yeah.
I'm not totally dysfunctional.
Thank you. Actually, maganda din i-point out na, oo nga, the second story is actually a speculative story. So, in this story, she's able to marry her sexual identity issue with her craft issue with speculative writing. So, magandang point na to raise that. Who's next? Sige, nandiyan na rin yung mic.
The story for me is very relatable. Very. Because I'm like teen.
Ibig sabihin ko,
Not surprising.
And my ex is from Zamboanga. So when I read Jimmy, Sati, Paseo, that's the stories that my ex kept from telling. What I like about the story is that there are striking sentences that plays an integral part and it propels the story also. And for me, the story is color blue. Aside from there are blue words, but the waves, the painting on the room speaks of color blue, and also the feeling when I read it, it's really blue. I like the line, perhaps she's thinking, this is a city unsure of itself, caught in the struggle of between new and old. The characters here are struggling and caught between new and old. I want to see more the struggling of the characters in, and of course, Alex. Because Alex is also struggling. Although she's like the antagonist here, the wrong person here, but I'm sure she also struggles why she acts like that. And also, Tin, of why she's so marupok and exchange her job to Alex. And then, and between the struggles, yun ang wala, the struggles. Tapos, I like the line here when they ate marang. I cracked the marang fruit open. So sexy. I'm sure this is for...
Bakla, you're so photo. Sorry, I have to say.
Bottom shaming.
Ay, o sige. Point well taken. Kasi tama ko.
I know Sigrid used this. I know it has intention. I grabbed the mark fruit open and watch as Alex eyes the way I bite into the flesh of the fruit, relishing it in its pungent sweetness. Nummy. Tapos, there's another one. Watching her now, toying with her panggit. And this one, I wonder if my stare carries any weight at all. And the last one. I run toward the southern tip of the shore, dip into the water wearing my shirt, shorts, and all. I love the word all because it has various meaning. Not everything physically, but everything in her. Swimming away. But I'm sure Alex will catch Tin. And then the struggle continues. So I want to know if there's a ship that will get her, there's a boat that will get her, submarine. because, but I carry on anyway and never look back. It's not enough. There was this physical attachment. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Joseph, for that loving tribute to the sentences. Sigrid. Oo, diba? Pero maganda. Tama ka. Namikaya siya.
sa sinabi niyo kanina, pinanagusto ko din yung yung kahit gaano ka-simple yung kwento or seemingly straightforward, may consistent na pag-i-insist dun sa ambiguity ng dynamics and yung naramdaman ko nung sa mga paunang comments, parang their relationship is way more complex, no, than yung gamitan na relasyon. Hindi siya ganun. At yung complexity na yun nag-aaray sa tingin ko dun sa gradients ng deliberateness at pagiging self-aware ng actions nila sa dynamics na yun. Tsaka yung ambiguity din sa kung hetero ba si Alex, kung meron ba talaga silang naging valid na relasyon. Yun, ang ganda-ganda nun. Kasi naramdaman ko yun dun sa weight na binigay ng protagonist dun sa nagising siya, naka-rest yung arm niya dun sa tiyan niya. Na the fact na magnified yun, the fact na amplified yung maliit na contact na yun. Mas hindi definite yung mga bagay at mas hindi demarcated yung mga bagay between them. Yun isa, balik ako dun sa isa point about pagiging deliberate or pagiging self-aware ng characters. Ang nakuha ko naman dun sa buwig nung nag-gush si Alex dun sa ikaw. Tapos, syempre, yung isa naman, natuwa na i-indulge, ganyan, i-bilhin. Tapos biglang, nasa iba na yung attention niya, nasa iba na yung parang kung ADHD si Bakla, ADHD, ganyan, parang yung naman na maganda, yung doon na mag-gush. Tapos, so ang naramdaman ko doon, may sincerity doon sa delight. At hindi siya napapabili ng ikaw, hindi siya nagagamit. Pero ang breach doon for the protagonist ay not attentive enough. At doon nagagaling unraveling on her part, nagagaling doon sa kawalan ng attentiveness ng beloved. Na i-complicate pa ulit pagdating dun sa bangka na i-confirm niya na alam naman pala niya. So ang ganda nun na hindi siya black and white na alam, hindi alam. Mas totoo, mas komplikado. Tapos ang pinaka-tender sa akin na part ng kwento ay yung that final act of that final concession na i-untangle niya pa rin yung sa best habang ipapataw yung ganong resolve, yung ganong decision. Ayun. So, hindi ko alam kung gusto mo, mas curious siguro kung yung resolve niya sa dulo na no turning back. Baka kasi may specificity yun sa inyo. Hindi sa parang generalize ako or kasi sa mga kakilala ko, talagang may maligit lang talaga ng mag-trigger. Tapos wala na talagang balikan. Tapos pati yung motif pati yung ganung final na concession na yung ganung housewives who suddenly abandon their yung maghahanda ng agahan, going about the motions, and then balikan.
Magandang point yung sabi ni Christian na totoo siya. Kasi yung the insistence on ambiguity is actually part of the authenticity of the way.
This is really the implication of the line. Because contrary sila extended indefinitely. So in other words, Patty cannot go home. But as thou think, soon, we will be home soon. I will be home soon. What is the resolution? I mean, what is it? Going home, not going home? Something will happen. I don't know why.
On a different matter, pero may implications sa short story, probably a question for Sigrid, and everyone can give a response. Ako kasi galing sa generation na ang short story ay 15 to 20 pages at least, which means that marami kang kayang i-tangle at i-untangle, i-fold at i-unfold na klase. Kasi ang peg talaga ay around these pages. Ang tanong ko lang, as a kind of observation dito sa mga stories na to, medyo may pagka-punctuated yung stories. They just end very quickly, parang isa lang ang gusto. Instead, ang sa akin, ang beauty of reading ay mas fulfilling na klase ng read na hindi abridged for most part, mga kwento, pero parang kind of exploration of the details, of feelings, of sentimentalities, mga ganun ba. So I was just wondering, purposive ba na you just want to tell this point, therefore, pag na-reach na yung point na yan, in terms of shortest number of pages, that's a story. I think nila Nori, yung Luna, or other writers here are still going for the longer kind of, hindi naman longer, short story na. For the more standardized kind of one, which gets to be published, even 3,000 words ang sa characters ang sa graphic press, maximum. Even mga course, palangka, 15, 20 pages of pig, etc. So, is this also kind of a positionality ng LGBTQ writers? Or it's not just here, kasi kahit sa ibang workshop, paigli na yung story rather than nakakakita tayo, rare tayo nakakakita ng long story.
Meron tayo mamaya mahaba.
Sobrang
size queen of story.
Wala tayo magagawa doon. Mamaya siguro, kung gusto mo mag-respond doon, or anyone in the group can also respond.
It's a good question.
It is a good question.
Kasi it has implications for the kind of style of the story.
I think the project it ends up dictating on the length of the story. I don't want to essentialize and say that there's something LGBTQ about minimalism or maximalism. These are minimalist stories, and the minimalist story has its own tradition and has actually there are variants of minimalism all around the world. No? We have the Dagi here, and we have sudden fiction in America, and you have these sort of tale-like little stories also in East Asia, no? Na hindi kailangan mahaba. But I'm thinking these two stories, I agree with Carlo, are variations of the same theme. They are about lesbian love as essentially tormented love. I mean, they're not happy stories. They're not happy love stories. They are both love stories. And what prevents the love from becoming happy, or the stories from becoming happy, would be things we can talk about. Because I'm thinking they may be particular to the lesbian nature of the love, diba? I, for instance, would like to look more closely at the first story and the dynamic between these two characters. There's so much that remains unsaid between them, and you're thinking, okay, she's been hurt and she can't really say it. The story itself does not say it, no? But I'm thinking, is that something that we can probably pin down or attribute to maybe the certain givens about lesbian relationships that, let's say, heterosexual relationships are not necessarily subjected to? Are lesbians in a relationship not as free to canvas emotions with each other? Is there still role playing there? These questions are interesting to ponder, diba? The LDR in the second story, this is a long distance romance kasi they're married na wife na, diba? That the second story is less satisfying because it is more ambitious. And the ambition probably
overpowered the actual rendition. The ambition for the second story is to actually polarize the two characters in terms of their relationship to the question of something more cosmic than just their own relationship. This is the future of the planet. Patty is content with living in the present, taking care of her garden, not thinking of the future really, essentially. The other one is actually already in a catastrophic mode of thinking. Apocalyptic na siya eh, kasi iniisip niya na we have to study the oceans because that's the way to actually help the world survive, because this planet is on its way to extinction or to doom, diba? So can you imagine having a relationship with someone who is actually already more or less in that place or that frame of thinking, and you are on the other hand quite happy with tending to the garden and seeing life persist and endure and helping life along. The other one is ready to give up on life more or less. So actually believes in life, but is less maybe optimistic about the prospects of life still enduring on this earth, di ba? So, ambitious siya kasi parang eco-criticism na may lesbian love, na may parang post-apocalyptic something. The first story is just a simple love story. It's something we've read before. You have stories where two characters, where one character desires the other one and the other one seems oblivious to the desire. One character is more sensitive than the other one. That kind, essentially, that story's been told, no? But I'm interested in the fact that she cannot even, Tin cannot even say it. That I've been hurt and you've hurt me over and over. Diba? What kind of relationship did they have even before this visit? Diba? What is the backstory? Hindi masyadong ni-reveal. Is that symptomatic again of lesbian social reticence? The reticence is interesting to examine because it might be actually attributable to something peculiarly LGBTQ. If we look, for example, also at their givens, no? This is a Zamboanga base. This is a Zamboanga story. Tin is quite happy staying in Zamboanga, and she's found her home, diba? So may regional intersectionality siya. Meron siyang provincial identity, no? That's very different from the cosmopolitan, sort of more mobile, beloved, no? So may mga ganun, no? It's complicated in its own way, but it's a smaller story because it has actually a frame, which is just a day or 2 days. Meron na overnight, tapos may trip lang, sinundo lang from the airport. Magayan, madali siyang manage as a story actually. Yeah. The other one, mahirap. Kasi parang ang approach na yung minimalism is the easy way out. Snip na lang natin and fill in the blanks or fill in all the details, no? I do agree with Roland na mas satisfying siguro, but then it might be an LGBTQ thing, the reticence, I'm not sure. Is there still some kind of reluctance on the part of a lesbian Filipino writer to be detailed? Is it too is telling all, is kiss and tell something that's harder for lesbian writers to do than for gay writers who are actually very wordy? We're going to have more words later, no? So much wordy love stories from gay writers, di ba? Who are free to have the more freedom to keep talking and yan, talakera yung mga kwento. Yung lesbian love, napansin niyo ba? We are smack dab in lesbian storytelling. These are yung, I'm sorry, kay Reggie, medyo forcing the issue ng konti, di ba? Except yung isa, kiss lang, yun lang yung parang last, no? Ito talaga, may relationship na sila, and there's so much emotion, di ba? So, mas pasok na pasok to sa banga ng lesbian fiction. Na-recruit mo na ba ito? Mga sources ito? Bongga.
Sa akin na yan.
Sa'yo na? But I would like to congratulate the writer. I mean, these were satisfying stories. Despite the fact that the second story left you with more questions, diba, than are necessary, I think. The first story left you with 1 or 2 questions, and they're okay. You can live with those questions and just imagine, in fact, what the answers are, and your proposed answer actually is just as good as someone else's, no? I'm thinking, ano ba yung nature ng hurt? The beloved is just indifferent or insensitive or a flirt. And so baka actually they used to be together and she just kept flirting with others and could not be possessed. Tin strikes me to be someone who is, kasi nga she's found her home, she's happy, she's in her niche, she's in her place. She is probably a Cancer or a Taurus.
Mas Gemini.
Mas Gemini ba? Kasi someone who likes the homemaker siya. Tapos yung isa is a slut. Or what Scorpio ba yun? Scorpio. Sagitt.
Let's extend this.
May pagkaganon opposite sila.
Let's extend the social conversation.
And we don't answer these questions, these mysteries. There's no fixed answer, and that's all right.
That's okay.
It's all right because you're thinking it makes them more universal that way, that they can accommodate possible answers. Yes, and that may be a lesbian thing too. The queer thing, the open
queer thing.
You understand what is queer? What is queer is what is not containable. The queer is the outside of the box. So maybe that's it. Diba? This willingness to lend itself to these different sorts of questions and answers. No? I would revise the second story. I would flesh them out a little more. I will not give up on it because I like your cosmic struggle here between the present, someone who is in the present, and someone who is already in the future. How do you love someone who is like Astra? Yung name pa lang na stellar na, she's ready to travel. And Patty is what you cannot get more homely. You cannot get more earthbound than Patty, who is tending to caterpillars and sort of, she is fixed in the now. So it's almost like she lives in the present, the other one lives in the future. How can those two people, even if they're not lesbian, in any kind of love relationship, someone who is already obsessing about the death of the planet and is looking like eons into the future, and someone who is actually quite happy living in the now, who is happier? Well, my answer comes from Louise Glück, one of my favorite poets. She has this book called The Wild Iris. And it's a sequence because the poems actually collectively tell a story. So the speaker is a gardener, and she's probably Louise Glück herself. And she's tending to her garden while the seasons change. And so she sees the garden as a metaphor, an analogy for being alive. And also inevitably dying, like the garden will die towards winter, diba? But it comes back to life again. That's the hopeful part. But the son is looking at his mother and is thinking, my mother is depressive. No? And that's something that the sequence actually talks about. The key to being happy is to identify with the leaf rather than the tree. The leaf that just casually falls and dies, right? And the tree kasi has memory and remembers things living and dying. No? So Astra is the tree, and this little skittering leaf is Patty. How do you make them exist in a relationship? The answer of Astra is indefinitely. We love each other, but I cannot be with you. My God, this is the ultimate non-committal story. Nakaka-wasted, diba? I'm sorry, I cannot be in love with someone like Astra. I want someone I can hold and pin down. Someone who... Yes, I can top. Well, you know, side, whatever. But someone you can hold. Someone who is in the present with you. What is love making if not making ourselves real to each other?
Or a viper.
Diba when your body touches another body, you suddenly become real. You're not dispersed because the other body reminds you of your boundary and therefore of your reality. So this other body is stellar and kind of wala na siya, spaced out na siya. And Patty is quite still real. So I like Patty more, and I feel sad for her that she sees. Okay. So anyway, Thank you, Sigrid. Such rewarding stories. Little stories, but actually not little. Taking on such great challenges, no? I prefer the first story, accomplished state. But I also love the second story's vision. So I wouldn't give up on the second story. I would tweak it and revise it. I will not get out of minimalism, but I would put enough evocation of the relationship so that I will actually make them more real. Because Astro can be more real too eh. Kasi paano naman lang siya, yung reality lang niya is parang maybe siya sa undersea, mga ganyan. Kulang yun. Maybe flashback to an actual moment when they were together. Right? Something like that. Sorry, I took so long. I'm sorry. What do you mean?
No, because suggestion namin ni dapat
internet sex, yeah.
Viber call.
Walang phone.
Maybe nag-Viber call siya sa sex.
Hindi na kayo nakakaplusan.
Or she's too short, hologram.
Pero this is a lesbian love story, hindi naman to porn. Kasi mo siya lang ako in Carlo.
Hindi pa siya nagbabandi sa phone.
Maniwala sa Sigrid.
Kaya nga, ano to, best practices. Mag-usap tayo later. We can help each other. Ano ba best practices?
Paring mo.
Those in LDR, sin anyone pa LDR? May LDR ba dito?
Ako!
Oh, yan. How do you cope? Oh.
LDR in an in-depth.
Oh, sige na. Oh. Sorry. I took so long.
Can I answer, Sir Roland's question?
Best practices.
Hindi yung length. Yung length. As you notice, I write long. Kahit yung short stories ay at least mahaba pa rin, 20 pages or so. Size queen talaga. Pero kasi, I think it was, one of my mentors sa pagsusulat ay si Sir Eugene. One of the things that we talk about would be the complications of technology. Kasi, halimbawa sa Dr. Zhivago, the entire thing is a train trip from one part of Russia to the other. So, the thing
It was a requirement of the print industry that you really shouldn't be publishing small books.
Kasi hindi economical. So, ngayon, as writers, we are confronted with this task of answering the question, why don't they text each other? Kasi meron kang conflict, tapos it could easily be resolved by texting or calling, tapos yung gagawa ko ng mga kung ano-ano kaetikan, mawawala ng baterya, uulan, babasa ang cellphone. So many things can be resolved by technology, and I think the reason why length has become an issue is because distance is no longer an issue. And print is no longer an issue kasi we publish online. And we make zines, which also means that longer text is not as desirable when it comes to zines. So, in response to Sir Roland's question, why are we writing shorter? It's because technology demands a response to these things. Not shorten yung text, hindi lang sa attention span ng reader, kasi that's very insulting of our readers. Hindi naman, they are shortened because there are certain elements in current conflicts that demand a shorter resolution, I think.
It's not the size, it's what you do with it. Diba?
Pero yun nga, at some of the trainings na, since I'm older, I think I'm the oldest kasi di ba sa Shakespearean, may tatlo kang narrative arcs in a single story. Ganun ako magsulat, kasi I'm old. Ganyan yung training sa amin, na kailangan tatlo yung narrative arcs in a single story. Tapos mga children nowadays, isa lang. So, I guess...
The anthologies that require like small pictures, flashbacks.
Yeah, siguro wala namang isang sagot lang doon sa question about the phenomenon of the length. I think the project will define how long or how short it should be. Yes, si John.
Okay, so dahil side ako, wala akong kailan sa size. Actually, parang may study kasi na sa internet daw yung babasahin na talaga ay the first 500 words. So beyond that, wala nang magbabasa masyado, no? And then, napansin ko rin ngayon sa, alam mo, sa mga workshops, sa mga write shop ng DepEd, usong-uso yung flash fiction. No? So parang yung form mo dahil mas madali, manageable siya, no? So baka may kinalaman yan doon. No? Pero I think talaga yung ano talaga, something to do with reading on screen, no? Na beyond 500, napapagod ka na, no? Or hindi na binabasa masyado, no? Anyway, yung gusto ko sa dalawang story ni Sigrid, no? Yung ano, yung sense of place, no? Yung may kinakupuokan, no? I think, lalo na yung sa Buanga niya, no? Although once lang nakutan sa Buanga, pero pag ginabasa mo, convince sa lugar, no? Kahit yung ano, no? Yung pangalawang story, agree ako kay Regine, hindi siya speculative fiction. No? In fact, ito yung pinaka-current, no? Kasi meron tayong emergency, hindi lang natin ina-acknowledge, no? That our world is falling apart, no? Kaya gusto ko yung story na ito at dapat i-develop talaga siya, no? Because at least kailangan talagang yung pook, no? Yung i-flesh out pa yung lugar, no? Kasi yung ma-appreciate yung story pag eco-critical, yung ginawa talaga na para alternative siguro na tirhan natin lahat, no? Pag nasira na natin yung surface ng mundo, no? So kaya hindi rin siya speculative kasi halimbawa yung ginagawa na talaga ito, no? Minamapa na yung ilalim ng dagat, no? Kung anong mga resources doon, no? Kaya maganda siya, no? Saka gusto ko rin yung idea na kaya nilang mahalin yung isa't isa, no? Kahit yung magkalayo sila. Kasi ang pag-ibig naman talaga hindi lang balat sa balat, no? Sa panahon natin ngayon, pwede na tayong makipagtalik sa magitan ng teknolohiya, no? I think cyber sex is sex, no? So kasi sabi nga nila, di ba, yung mahusay naman natin talaga ng sex organ, yung imahinasyon, yung utak, no? So pwede mag-connect sa ganun, no? Sa kapag tingnan natin kasi yung lugar sa mas malawak na paningin, yung Sibugay naman sa Buanga Peninsula, hindi siya malayo sa Hawaii. Diba? So Sulawesi, ito yung Pacific Ocean. So pag tignan mo yung Earth, hindi sila magkalayo. Magkalapit sila, no? And sa tulong pa ng teknolohiya, talagang magkasama sila. Yun yung gusto kong i-explore, no? Pag i-revise na yung second story. Okay.
That's at least 2,000 miles. Malayo yun.
Oo, pero kapag tingnan kasi sa
hindi mo nalala mo yun.
Well, wag mo underestimate yung aking buntot. Kasi ganun yun. Kasi pag pinag-usapan natin yung ating mundo, na nasira na siya, kailangan lang natin tignan yung mundo sa mas malayo at mas malawak. No? Hindi pwedeng naka-zoom in tayo, no? Sa ating sarili o sa ating surroundings.
Pati nga naka-zoom in eh.
Oo.
Sa zoom.
Nakamotor.
Ngayon, Meryl, Alaska true Meryl. Mag-high school na Skechers. Skechers, depende sa
Ang preferred brands na pala po, Alaska brand.
Pero kailangan pala
So, welcome sa second session for the day. May dalawa tayong kwento, pero bago ko ipasa kay Carlo yung mic, ay gusto ko lang mag-ramble certain thoughts about queer. Una ay parang sabi nila kapag walang Tagalog or Filipino word for it, it's a foreign kind of experience. No? Tulad ng queer. Wala ko naisip ba kayong Filipino word for this kind of identity?
Alanganin.
Pwede yung alanganin.
Actually, it's embaka itself,
Right.
which means indecision, in between, uncertainty. That's what it is. Parang queer din siya.
Right. So, yun. So, parang medyo kailangan natin pag-isipan itong translation ng queer identity sa klase ng local or Philippine context. No? Pangalawa, although wala naman direct translation, may mga queer moments naman tayo sa Philippine literature. Kunyari yung pagka-feminine ng description kay Florante, na ngaw habang nakatali sa puno, parang queer moment dito na nalagalyo na even the writers of that kind of era ay medyo may a bit of flow sa klase ng male sensitivity nila. At yung kay Rizal, yung Elias at yung tinsi ng Bangkaray, ni Elias at ni Ibarra, full moon pa ang description, at doon sila nagkaroon ng intimacy or nagkaroon ng discourse about the evolution.
It's an earlier moment in one. Diba niligtas ni Elias si Ibarra sa Waya? They actually take turns saving each other's lives. Diba? And you know, it's romantic friendship kasi yung kanyang yung paradigm. Nung unang pumunta si Elias sa bahay ni Ibarra, after that incident sa Waya, yung actual Spanish had to leave. Because nung nakita ni Ibarra si Elias up close for the first time, yung description ng biceps niya, I remember. Nakakaloka yun. Basta it is para siyang awe-stricken by how earthy, very brawny itong Elias. Bankero. Oo.
Which goes back din kay Florante, the way si Balagtas ay describe din si Florante na parang Greek god.
Di ba Florante ay sa Pundala kung Aladdin?
Right, or Flerita and Miss Ang Girl ko na may queer moment din. Dahil they had to save the men sa everything. O yung queering na ginawa ni Lino Broca sa isang macho novel ng macho writer na sa Uko ng Liwanag. Para sa pelikula, wala yung scene na kung saan ay may trabaho, pag ganun kagwapo ang character mo, may trabaho sa kasa, male kasa, na call boy, na kung saan ay may couturier na customer at pinapaiwan siya na eventually he needs to go down. Hindi, parang hindi ko kilala. Parang hindi nagkaroon ng showbiz life. Or yung, as a kind of segue din, yung queer leads to a logical aesthetic called camp. At kung sa pelikula ito, parang yung Joey Santiago movies, ito na binabakla, yung term na binabakla yung lahat ng bagay dun sa pelikula. So you have a scene, for example, na kasama I forget ko anong film, si Alma Moreno sa si Lord Tolentino na rival sa panahon na yun. At sampalan nila ay sa gitna sa backdrop ay mga lalaki naka-white briefs. Sa ganitong klaseng camping scene. Or yung mga lines ni Rita Gomez or si Celia Rodriguez na may bitbit na parrot in the middle of a shopping center. At meron siyang allusion. Nakalimutan ko yung bitty line nandun na bakit siya may bitbit na
Temptation Island na lang.
Right. So,
Temptation Island.
ibig sabihin, which was considered as pretty subversive noong panahon na yun. Kasi they covert dapat ng sexuality.
They were cruel.
Right. So, bago nagkaroon ng Almodovar na camp ay merong Joey Santiago na. Which goes also on the idea ni Susan Sontag sa kanyang essay noong 1964 pa siya, Notes on Camp, na binabasa niya talaga yung gay aesthetic na to, yung gay praxis na kung saan ay yung embellishment becomes very subversive because you put everything out of context. or in another location na nagkakaroon na depoliticize siya or naging political at the very least itong mga layering na ginagawa mo dito. So, it's over the top, parang exaggerated, hyperbole, description dito. O yung sinasabi na self-conscious sketch. Kasi may design din naman talaga siya. Hindi siya yung organic, katulad ng mga altar sa bahay na halo-halo yung fake flower, yung plastic flowers dun sa Chinese lights, the bulb na nag-mimic ng candles, etc. So, I've asked si Carlo to talk about himself at yung identification niya ng class na identity. Nandun sa kit natin, mahaba yung description. So siya na magpaliwanag na. At saan located ito sa body of work? Probably isa sa mga pinaka-senior dito or may body of work in terms of writing ay si Carlo. So I'd like him to share his experiences both in terms of yung identity na to at yung writing na ginawa niya sa point of view.
So organized ako minsan ng orgy. Yes, because I haven't been in one. So...
Hindi ka na-invite, kaya nagawa ka na sa sarili. May invitation ng orgy.
No, anxious ako around, cis gay men. Recently ko lang din realize that. And so I was interested what happens, what are the dynamics. So I organized it. And then it came to a high point, and then I realized na, in porn, everything looks directed, but apparently, when the orgy reaches a fever pitch, it melts into a tableau. As in, naka-choreograph siya naturally. And then, as the night progressed, I realized hindi na ako sumasama at hindi na rin ako voyeur. Nagpupulot ako ng tuwalya, nagtatanong ako, okay ba kayo dyan? Ano ba yun? Okay ba? Gusto niyo ba yun? Naging host na lang ako, gusto niyo ng tubig, may condom dyan, lubricant, yan. Gusto niyo ba ilakas ko pa yung aircon? Ganyan. So,
sa bahay mo ba kasi?
Sa condo. And then so, yan, nag-host ako eh. And so, and there was also something, I realized there's also something pleasurable and erotic about that, taking care of that. Taking care of bodies, etc. I opened with that because I'm actually very interested in the in-between, in the spaces that gender and sexuality you don't usually think gender and sexuality sort of don't occupy. And mas nagkaroon ako ng lakas at ng daring and I think courage to explore that when I came out as a gender non-conforming, non-binary femme queer, which is actually sort of just saying bakla lang naman, And when I say non-binary, that means I really don't associate myself as either man or woman. I'm a third gender, and I remember clearly that, I think back in the 80s and the 90s na parang derogatory, yung third gender, yung matawag nila. But right now, the third, I consider myself as a kind of third sex. The ones that are unnamed. That's why yung programa na ginawa ko last year, which was called Butiki Baboy, is because girl boy bakla to, Butiki Baboy. So yung Butiki Baboy are the unnamed identities in the gender spectrum. So, and then in terms of writing, when I came out nga as, bakla again, yung mga earlier writings ko, na-realize ko na yung mga bakla characters ko are in the periphery. They would usually just be referred to. And then I realized na there seemed to be a lack in, exploration, again, of the in-between, of the shade, of the outside, of the gubat, of the wilderness, of the things that cannot be centered, I suppose. And so I sort of started writing and exploring more on about queerness, being queer, or just simply, being, and then, just occupying a space as it is. Because usually, as a bakla, you're expected to be a couturier or a professor or a, you know, you have to have something. You have to be a part. No. And then sorry, no. And there's always have to be something, you know, aspirational. But you know, I tell my because and then bigla naging mother na ako sa mga mas batang queer kids. Dito sa isang performance group that I inadvertently built apparently. So parang naging mother na ako sa kanila. And sometimes when they get anxious, I just tell them, you know, guys, just be. You do not need to, you know, have yourself affirmed. Sometimes you don't need, you know, even to your fellow gays, parang wala kayong dapat patunayan. Just, you know, just be bakla, be trans, be, you know, be queer. Yeah, that's where I'm coming from.
Salamat, Carlo. I-reaffirm naman natin. Takpakan natin.
Story. This goes to bigger project.
Okay. When I was young, I didn't really. I thought I was more of a reader. And then I went to corporate. And I didn't start writing again until I was 33. So I've only been writing for about 5 years. So this started out. This project started out as a pitch to ABS-CBN back in 2012 as a movie for then up-and-coming comedian Vice Ganda. You can guess who Vice Ganda is among the characters. And then, of course, they didn't like it. This was overtly gay. And so, after several years of research and rewriting, I managed to finish my first 50,000 words of a novel, which won Scholastic Asian Book Award last year. Anyway,
can you elaborate a little more on that award? Because the point of that award is to discover the Rowling of Asia.
Nuts. Yeah, something like that. Because I don't want to have Western standards on our book. I am beautiful by myself. And then, so immediately after the award, I got to talking with the publishers, and I started pitching a trilogy, but they were asking for a minimum of 5 up to 7. And I was like, oh my god, I'm not prepared for that. Okay. So anyway, so what you have with you is the first arc of the second book and the first chapter of the fourth book. So the project is basically me as a Tagalog have been jealous of regions with intact epics. The Panayanon epics are, of course, so nakakakilabotly amazing, but whatever we had in the Tagalog regions were destroyed and vilified, and what few that remain are basically kwentong bayan that don't really collect into a full story at all. What I did manage to find was a book by Pote, a French anthropologist, who collected confessions of Tagalogs. And then the Tagalogs would confess their sins of their beliefs. So the phrasing would be very vilified because it was the friars who wrote them down. And you can just imagine the morals of these friars who wrote down things that were said to them in confidence. And basically the project is to collect as much information of the missing kingdom of Mai which is located in Bae, Laguna, as reported by Ambet Ocampo, through trade blogs with China. So we have no local records of the only records are in China, because the Tagalogs were trading cotton, silk for iron pots, and among other things. So I would collect images from Bicol, Namayan region in Makati, Tondo in Manila, some Kalinga, Mindoro images, and then speculate what kind of kingdom Maki would look like if the history remained. So, which made it really easier for me to basically speculate everything. This is not historical fiction. This is speculative fiction. It is an entirely separate world where assumptions are gratuitously made and falsifications are done eagerly. There.
Who is Harry Potter in your?
Harry Potter here does not appear. It's one of my advocacies would be the removal of the beautiful young heroine, Tuan, who does not appear here. Oh, he was mentioned. Is ugly young boy who aspires, who is envious of his more beautiful peers, who willingly trades body parts to achieve power. You'll see the processes of those exchanges in Muhen's story. Muhen is, of course, the vice ganda. Tuan was originally Daniel Padilla in the original lineup. Pero tas iba pa yung ka-love team niya noong 2012. Anyway, other things that I want to point out is that both characters are Aro. I myself identify as Aro. I'm aromantic. And I wanted to, first, as a young adult, I wanted to talk about, have that icon of correctness. When I remember being a teenager and my icons were Catwoman. Really, it was the Michelle Pfeiffer Catwoman. That I considered, the strong, powerful, delicious, slithering female in a catsuit. And so nowadays you have Harry Potter, Jana Silam, who's a wonderful young adult novel. I just want young people to be able to read. It's okay to be me. I'm gonna be fabulous the way I am. I don't have to struggle to conform to the binary. So, and I specifically didn't want it to be gendered in the same way that there will be a love interest. So I wanted to focus on the because as an aromantic, we still make human connections. I primarily think of community and altruism. So both of the characters in this story are aromantic. Say they perceive, rather, I want to, if we have been reading gay, lesbian, bisexual, queer texts, I guess this will be our introduction to an aromantic text. They are explicitly, I wrote them to become aromantic characters. Not that they are incapable of it, but they pursue a more community level, altruistic.
I mean, as a writer, sumasakit yung dibdib ko pag nanood ako ng Amaya, every episode, maraming mali. So parang kapag helpless na, ginagamit nila yung mga words.
Yung Toas na panood mo?
Hindi ko napanood yun.
Hindi cinema mas responsible. Toas was made by Derek Abrido. And in order to make it, they actually had to secure the permission of the Panay noon. May IP lawyers na sila, may IP rights na. You cannot just actually do research there and use their own culture for any text, like turn into a film or get music or whatever, without their permission. Kasi meron na silang copyright. They can actually, they patented
It's
it.
not just permission, it's validation. You have to bring it back to them.
And then, yes, it's
if you pay for it, they give you permission, you make it.
May
You have to bring it back
conditionalities
to
siya,
them.
hindi lang yung permission. Yung permission comes with responsibilities.
Pero sa project ni Cupcake, bang buong Pilipinas, hinyan na namin ko naman. Kasi covered niya yung buong arapela.
Kaya, I
So,
think
pakita ng mga bahay.
I don't have a legal mind. I don't know if actually the IP laws we have will cover material that already in fact they're part of pop culture in a way or mass culture na. And they were written by the Spanish and marami doon mali actually, di ba? So I like the spirit of the project of trying to come up with our own kind of fantasy world, and that fantasy world will be unique from the other fantasy worlds, no, in Southeast Asia and the rest of the world. Even Rowling was liberally deforming, appropriating, misappropriating, Arthurian, lahat yun, Arthurian, medieval, classical, whatever, European mythologies. Mishmash na rin siya. Wala naman nagre-reklamo, di ba? Kasi iba yung situation. Sa atin kasi may IPs talaga eh. Buhay pa sila. The cultures exist eh. So, it's a different scenario. We need a lawyer.
Oo nga. So, kasi
an IP lawyer will be able to enlighten you. Pag lumabas ito at biglang tumiba-tiba ka sa takilya, expect some summons, baka you might need to split some of your royalties with all the IPs of the country.
Nakita ko lang dito yung sa ano lang, panayang doon lang.
Ako, apat na nobela, limang nobela yan, nandiyan na lahat, mga tag-sud, nandiyan na rin siguro, ano?
Alam mo, hindi ko sabi ko na project, ganun, no? Yung parang Harry Potter. At hindi lang, the first trivia lang, sa 1970s, yung first kinaraya Nobel, Erasmo Tordesillas, who is a chief of police sa isang town sa Antique, sumulat siya ng nobela, yung kinaraya. At, ano siya, Olaina Prinsesa Pandaga. Itong prinsesa, ito na diwata na may barko na dito. And then, kung tinignan ko yung typescript, kasi kinukwento na siya over radio sa DYKA. At lahat nakikinig daw pag kinukwento niya gabi-gabi. So, sinusulat na sa bond paper. Nung tinignan ko yung ano niya, yung manuscript niya, my God, plagiarized siya sa sa Lord of the Rings. Yung the same beginning ng Lord of the Rings na yung hierarchy ng mga ng mga diwata, ganun talaga yung tamahaw niya, elves na elves. And then yung second novel niya, ito na talaga giveaway. Ang title, Bilbo ang Punol. So, may ganun. Pero maganda yung...
Mas gusto ko na yun kasi it's the margin plagiarizing the sense.
Oo. Pero maganda ginamit yung mga folklore ng Panay, no, to weave, no? Ginamit na yung structure ng Lord of the Rings. And may I stress police siya.
No, I'm not serious. I don't think you'll be sued. I think you can well argue that this is common knowledge or common Hindi naman kasi walang intent to sound authentic eh. It is obviously fantasy and the whole project is well-meaning. Hindi siya intended to demean the cultures of the country, to demean these things. It's ang dami na uncomplicated LGBTQ writing, pero bakit ito nila ang daming pwedeng hindi na LGBTQ concern, di ba? But it's important because yet again, we're talking about others. No? And the IPs are others in relation to the national imagination, di ba? We're trying to bring them in, but they've been excluded eh. So,
ang wala naman yata ni John, yung right context, yung right use pa. Kasi may binabanggit siya na parang hindi ganun dapat yung spelling or kwan.
Yung spirit kasi niya is
parang tradition eh, na parang
right. Ibig sabihin, pero ang sinasabi niya, more of fidelity.
Fidelity.
If you use these terms, loaded siya with, packed siya with a lot of cultural meanings na hindi mo siya pwedeng ganun lang ang appropriation. Yung
I think they
isipan
should,
lang.
the book comes out and then the people concerned complain, that's fine. You should be ready.
Yun nga, you should be ready kasi handa ka ba sa ganung
The publisher actually wants me to invent entirely new terms.
Bakit hindi na nga na?
Oo.
Devoid ka pa sa ganitong klaseng bandage.
Kasi
They've expressed that.
may nakikita kung, hindi ko alam, no, I may be wrong, pero kung kino-question natin ating mga sarili, kung ako bakla na writer, may karapatan ba ako magsulat ng kwentong lesbiana? Sabi naman natin, wala namang magbabawal, hindi naman bawal, pero do it rightly. Parang ganun, gawin mong tama. Parang ganun, parang may nakikita akong ganito, kung hihiram ka, or gagamitin mo itong mga ganitong terminology, cultural artifacts, siguraduhin mo siguro tama. Or otherwise, or ready ka sa magiging impact.
Ginagawa na ng Channel 7, Channel 2. Wala namang problema.
Pero ang daming criticism.
Tuloy-tuloy ang network, tuloy-tuloy ang advertising, tuloy-tuloy ang tiba ng pera. Ito naman, literacy naman to. I mean, it's already, it's a promotion of literacy in a way. It's the written word. And that's already, in fact, an advocacy.
But when you use actual terms, like Gayangos IP, no different.
Why did your publisher ask you to invent words?
Yun nga, parang...
Na-discuss nyo itong issue na to?
Parang walang bagay.
Na-discuss nyo?
Yes. They don't want to use... they wanted to remove all italics, which I didn't completely do. Ayaw na nila ng italics. If you're going to create a secondary world now, dapat everything should be English. So all the Tagalog words are considered words that naturally appear in this world's English. So wala daw italics. Tapos, the fact that some of the Tagalog terms, even yung Tagalog terms that I use, are themselves loaded. So I should just make new words up entirely. Which is of course very different.
Yeah, I think not just in terms, but for example, you invent new names. Don't use anini because you might say that's a part of Panay and it's placed in the wrong location.
But I mean,
you just invent kasi that's part of your world making, building.
But cultures are evolving, cultures are dynamic and they're alive, and we're ossifying them by insisting dapat ito yung authentic meaning ng mga words or ito lang yung pwedeng I'm of the mind that everyone will be generous, the IPC event, that we can in fact do this. But you tell a good story, and that the story is in the end an ennobling one, and you did not demean anyone and any of these cultures, it should be fine. It's fantasy, it's YA, it's not passing itself off as an anthropological treatise with truth claims. The truth claims here are imaginative truths. Or emotional truths. They're not historical truths, no? So, I think yun ang pass mo, yun ang free pass. But I would still ask you to be responsible. I think in terms of the spirit of the cultures that you're getting material from, the spirit of, let's say, gender, and then you're doing it, no? Gender egalitarianism, which was one of the key features of our pre-colonial past, was more a gender egalitarian time. So you're doing it through the characters. Diba? You can argue that and see that through your novel. The LGBTQ question is also interesting. And how sexual can you allow your characters to get? Because the effeminacy of Muhen and the gender ambiguity of Tuan, I mean, they're being sort of like neither man or woman, that's one. But will you allow them to desire? Will you allow them to have, is there an erotic scene somewhere?
It will be Gilas who courts Tuan because Tuan doesn't love himself. So there will be because Tuan is horribly convinced that he's ugly. So he becomes incapable of accepting love. So it would be Gilas who will.
And then they will make love.
Maybe out of sea. I won't describe it in a way.
Mohen is an adult, can make love. When you give Mohen a love life, Mohen is the insect goddess, right? So will she make love like an insect? Will she grow wings? Does she have antlers? Does she have feelers or antlers somewhere else?
That's right.
Since this is supposed to be a novel, not a short story, if you don't have that information, if you just look at this as a short story, you will notice a lot of weaknesses in terms of its narrative. You have said, somebody has mentioned that it's very careful, very thorough in the world building. So, description, yeah. Ang dami, no? But also the movement. My God, it's like sitting down would take 2-3 paragraphs. Why? And then you ask what is achieved by
the word count requirement of the publisher. Kasi pinasubmit yan, bit by bit. Sabi, I need 10,000 words. Ganon, di ba? Was that it? Word count requirement?
Not for this one, not yet. I mean...
Pero nasanay nga na for the first one, kaya ganun din yung rhythm yan.
When I was reading the story, I just felt so tired because it was so laborious and slow, and I thought, where is it going? I wish I could see the end, and it's something, the passages are building up, then it falls down and build up and falls down. Okay, I can accept that kind of movement, but here it's like, after given the trick, look at how many pages, the trick, going to that island.
And it's more action-packed.
Siguro, but I don't know if this were just a story, but like you said, this isn't quite the final point. These are just preliminary drafts. But
for a novel, masyado mabagal pa rin.
Mabagal pa rin. You have to create some sort of meaning, the climaxes along the way.
Especially kung ang reader is young, no? Lalo siya before. Kaya the YA fans here, those who read a lot of YA, can you weigh in as far as the pace of the narration is concerned? Sigrid and Reggie.
The main, I could think of comparing Le Guin versus Tolkien. Kasi si Tolkien goes into the trouble of describing pati yung plato, who owns it, who are the former ancestors. Whereas ako, personally, I prefer Le Guin. Kasi it moves, but without compromising character development as well. So,
pero YA, I wouldn't call YA si Tolkien. Public, yes. So, ganun din, masyado rin, crazy.
Kasi what I noticed in the trends of YA, back when I started with YA, that there would be large blocks, not blocks, but a space for dialogue instead of narration. And what I noticed here is medyo overwhelming yung narration. So I guess in terms of the visible form, I guess that can be remedied that way. So you can look forward, there will be an exchange of words between the characters instead of focusing on the narration and the not the spoken.
I think even, for example, the motive for the strip, it's not foregrounded enough so that we are reminded that there is a very serious mission that is going to be accomplished. Parang in the beginning, it's just referred to in passing, and then that's lost. Lalabas na yan sa end. I wish it were, I mean, if this were probably just a short story, more grounded yun palagi, because that's the thing that will push this the
Pero
narrative.
kasi nga novel siya, I think it's biding its time. Parang yun yung feeling ko, parang I have a lot more ground to cover. The movement will happen more quickly in the next chapter. Di ba parang ganun, you have time to explain to yourself as a writer, you can actually justify it can be slow because this is not the things will pick up in the next one. Di ba parang ganun. But I think it's such a long chapter. Maybe that's my problem. I think you can split it into 3 or 2. In the way that the Moed thing is shorter and manageable. And also yung attention span ng reader din kasi stretch mo yung chapter. Chapters are commercial breaks. Diba? Like, of course, no one watches TV. Everyone's on YouTube. Nagko-commercial na rin si YouTube. So, may breaks pa rin, di ba? Ayun, I watch YouTube and then now and then, biglang mahihinto kasi magko-commercial, di ba? Some kind of rest in between, no? And respite from the very thick description that's happening. Let's hear the others, because volunteer na, Adrian.
I wonder about the question of sex scenes in young. I wonder about the question of sex scenes in young adult fiction. I'm not sure about actual graphic sex scenes, but I think is there room for sexual awakening? And how would that be expressed with Tuan and Gilas? Because you trace that Gilas is going to be a love interest of Tuan.
I don't know. I personally wouldn't. I think it's good to validate young gay people that their sexuality is correct. Because a lot of young people, I mean, I thought it was a bad thing. Well, when we were young, we thought all sex was bad, not just gay sex. It just so happens that gay sex was worse. Even het sex was bad for young people. So, I think it's, I want to make it sound like there's validation of the biology as their biological needs and their carnal needs as valid and correct. But of course, I'm not gonna describe penises going into buttholes.
There's a gay boy character sa Dragosina.
Who died?
Who died. Yun nga lang. But it was the sexuality of the character was discussed without having to discuss the actual acting. You know? Which I part, na-surprise ako sa siya. First time ko nakabasa na dito, na Pilipino na, YA pa. Pwede ipasok yung ganung bagay ko.
I'm so disappointed when you
Hinati. Kawawa naman.
But there's
what's the gayest that you will allow Tuan to get in book 1?
Ay! In book 1, nothing.
You don't give him a moment in the sun where he's sashaying and kind of butterflies come to kind of make dako on his hair. Walang ganon. Wala siyang ganon more. Like,
or she eats flowers, ganyan.
Walang ganon. Tapos ano. So how do we identify one exactly as queer?
well, I guess I'm pulling from my own experiences as a young gay man. The gaze as it falls
The way
upon,
one like looks at guys. Okay.
and the jealousy of beautiful women.
Ah. So women as rivals.
Meron siyang ganong moment.
Oh, yan na, di ba? You're teaching young gay men to find women as rivals. React the women here.
Pero ano nga, di ba? Iron masculinity.
Hindi na naman. Pretty pa. O, di syempre ako na yun. Pinapersonal ko na yan. Sharp.
No, it's kasi what we're missing is the fact that this is YA, and YA is a sub area of children's literature. And children's literature is a genre defined by who reads it, rather than the form of it, the topic of it. It's really it's an audience-defined genre. And whether we like it or not, there is a didactic, educational, pedagogical element or aspect to YA. So I was wondering if your idea is to ennoble and dignify the life of the sissy boy, who is really in the real world in need of such, at least models, diba? I wonder if you put enough in the novel to actually allow the sissy boy reader to relate to Tuan. Parang wala pa.
Nagkwento ako ng libro. Okay.
Nabili pa rin namin the word.
No, I mean,
Kasi dito wala. Wala si Tuan eh.
Isa.
Sa an LGBTQ workshop, yung queerness ng text. So,
the way, and then Lixie is a bully. So, Lixie bullies him around, and he thinks it's okay. Because ito yung Tuan was projecting his own self-loathing and by validating the abuse he would receive from Lixie. Meanwhile, they will...
Let me get this straight. Tuan, your hero, is characterized by self-loathing.
And then he discovers to like himself in the end by...
Okay,
by
that's yung art niya.
Oh, yung art niya is being left behind by the slavers gave him the capacity to save his friends. And he redeems his self-liking.
Maganda yung art ng first novel.
So, he eventually saves Lixie and Gilas and earns their actual...
Using magic.
Yes.
Okay. Alright. That's nice. So, queer hero na nga siya. It's a big, wonderful thing to do. To have a queer hero in a YA novel. And to have that YA novel distributed globally. And whether meron tayong problema about authenticity, this is a Filipino book. And it's going to make a splash globally. Ang hero niya is bakla. I mean, I would call him bakla. I'm sorry, di ba? Parang,
genuinely bakla. She's sissy from chapter 1. As in, yung, I guess I'm pulling from my own childhood, yung mga tinutuhod sa likod ng tuhod para madapa. Tapos,
so medyo lampa-lampa.
Tapos wala siyang sport.
Bully.
Tapos, he can't even compare to pretty people. And always outward yung
Bagay okay
projection
na meron siyang ganong disability, no? Yung kanyang flaw is his own vanity in a way, no? Kasi he looks at, he sees himself as ugly, which means actually he would like to be beautiful. May vanity. Okay. So that's a relatable flaw, I think, even for children, no? And children, well, I don't know if you remember, it was during childhood when we first realized the power of beauty. When we had classmates who were beautiful and how they were getting things that we couldn't get. Diba? So this one knows it.
Pero appropriation siya din. Kaya kahit baka yung aesthetic or yung beauty standard,
during this time? Oo nga, what defined beauty ba for Tuan?
Lixie. Si Lixie is dark-skinned, slender, but muscular. She's big of hip. She's bare-breasted. Did I mention she had no shirt? Pero she's bare-breasted the entire time. She wears a skirt and the jacket. At some point, she rejects the skirt because she couldn't run. So I wanted her to be...
But the other thing is, antique niya, pile, at saka red.
Yes.
Yun ba? Maganda?
Yeah.
Oh, so the standard is that beauty, no? Okay.
Red teeth, sharpened to points.
Sharpened. That's, may tattoos siya.
She's skilled to heal, so one axis.
Okay. So yun, ganda. Naka-world naman siya.
Pero kailangan makinig ka natin with the graphic purpose ba?
Hindi, di ba YA has that burden to bear? Because you're addressing children essentially. And so, even Harry Potter, di ba, may lessons for kids yun eh. It's really, you want to present a model on how to grow up, how to be a child, and how to cope with the problems of adolescence. So,
and not just that, yung discussion with the editor is that despite your readers are children, your buyers are parents.
they will determine kasi what's good for their kids.
The pedagogy of the text is necessitated by the buyers. If they're not the readers, they're still the people paying for it.
Okay, a related question. This is Scholastic. This is a global brand in a way. This will be globally distributed. And the editor of Harry Potter, the discoverer of Rowling, is the one who thought of this contest to discover the Rowling of Asia, which you are now. You're supposed to
Can I wait to be rich?
Yeah, you're supposed to be. In case mo mag-work siya, di ba? You're supposed to be that. Already from the beginning, the premise is Orientalist. Kasi they're looking for medyo nasa age na siguro yung baol ng fantasy ni Rowling at saka yung mundo na secondary na nire-recycle lahat ng mythologies of Europe. Diba? With Thor and everything, nakuha na si Nordic, nakuha na, hindi pa masyado nakukuha yung Eastern Europe myths, no? I'm sure makakakuha rin. Puro vampires kasi ang galing doon so far, eh. Pero ito, naghanap sila. Another place in the world with a mythological past na pwede pang to throw into this global monster that wants to keep the beast, that wants to keep feasting on fantasy material, di ba? Were you slightly troubled that you are actually feeding the beast with your own?
I have never thought of that. Now that you bring it up, yes.
It is the bigger scene. It's a bigger picture, isn't it? That you have, it's trade in a way of imaginations, diba? That our imagination will now be globalized and more or less monetized, and you are the foremost beneficiary. And I'm your friend. And I might take a loan later. No, I'm kidding. No, but it is another level of
exploitation.
No, it's another ethical layer. Diba? That ikaw lang ang pwedeng dito sa garden nito, ikaw ang merong burden, kami wala, hindi naman kami na-discover ng Scholastic. Wala naman kami libro that's about to be globally launched in a few months. Globally launched, meaning deliver the books printed in Singapore or UK?
Malaysia because
cheaper.
Cheaper.
Printed in Malaysia but distributed automatically around the world.
Wow. Sana bumili.
Kailangan na balikan yung IP communities at mag-put ng pera doon.
Or magpalit ng terms lahat. Control A na to.
Pero naman James, di ba? James.
Control H.
Ano naman tawag dito? Muhen naman, who's the Diyosa of insects, is in your book. So sabihan mo na lang si Muhen, huwag lang awin yung libro mo. Diba? Ibang insect ang padala, huwag lang. Ang ginawa na lang, I'm sure bibili niya. It's a fantasy.
May tanong lang ako sa kanya. Kasi primal na concern sa mga items ng land. Meron bang issue ng lupa? Kahit pa paano. Kasi inappropriate mo yung problema nila eh. So, are you giving any hint about that concern?
The public ba yung copper plate? Not here. There is a concept in the Tagalog regions, yung bibilin mo yung copper plate mo. It's when you stop being a slave and become a timawag. So, unfortunately, you inherit the debts of your parents and your parents' parents. So, darating yung time na your utang is so immense that it's literally impossible to own anything. So, I wanted to make that an allegory to the actual conditions of farmers where they are renting spaces to farm. So they work in the datu's fields, they don't earn anything, they basically are given food and clothing by the datu, which only adds to their debt. So that didn't detail land ownership, but that is a very large factor of the motivations of the three characters. Basically, Gilas is a half-Capri. His mother prostituted herself to Capri in order to sell his son. So, kasi pag nagkaroon siyang Capri anak, ibebenta niya yung anak dun sa mga dati. And then, so, there,
Hindi naman ako naghahanap ng one-to-one correspondence.
yun nga, oh.
Pero si Sigrid kasi hindi ba kaya mag-usay din siya. Gumamit ng bawal na anthropological phenomenon. Pag nagpinilika siya yung makes perfect sense ang bawal din sa left-handed gardens. Kung bakit nagpapalit sila ng mga genders. Kasi yung pag ginamit yung spectrum na touch, ako, okay lang ako yung iba. It's just that, hinahanap ko yung mas inventive na analogs nung data na na-research. Gusto mong talaga dun sa world. That's all I'm asking. Otherwise, the plan is okay. In fact, gusto ko nga yung part dito na parang may ambahan, yung may library, doon ako na-excite dun sa part na yun. Kasi nung nakita kami sa Indonesia, dito ko ingit sa kanila yung library nila ng mga bamboo inscriptions na ando na lahat yung repository. So yun ang naalala ko dun sa
Mindoro meron pa rin.
Oo. So, gusto ko na-extend yung scene na yan sa words. Kasi ang halaga ng poetry eh.
Mali. Dapat hindi ko nahuli yung kama.
Sa Java ba yun? Parang try ko lang. Dalawang kama.
Hindi yung kama as in the... Ano yung... Nagkamali yung kama. Hindi yung comma, yung C-O-M-M. Pero yung pinahingap kasi ni Sir John, kama is a Hispanic word. Dapat nahuli ko yun. This one wala pa. Ay, meron akong edit.
Maraming lapses, lalo na yung tense. Na tense in a fault. Ng konti, hindi kasing tense yung isa. Pero na tense yung
May editor naman siya.
Oo. Wala nang will dito sa world na ito, puro wood na. Pero nag-will pa rin. Dami pa rin will. So ano, Pasto. Tapos, alam ko, pinababago ng editor mo yung wala ng past perfect, pinagawang simple past lahat, no? Kasi sa YA fiction, parang gano'n. Signal mo lang siya that it's more previous to the past once, and then past na lang lahat. So, rewrite and rewrite.
Hindi, sila na nag-rewrite. Tapos, a-approve ko
Kasi
lang.
kami editor, di ba?
So, they just send me the file. Tapos,
But to be fair, you gave us raw stuff. So talagang ito yung, ikaw yung nagsulat.
I remember messaging Sir John last January. Na sabi ko, nasa Antique po ako.
Okay.
Kasi nag-research ako dun sa love story ni Annie at saka ni Nogas. Tapos talagang, the first story is literally inspired by that love story.
Kwentuhan ka na lang sana kay John.
Maganda na...
Hindi ka pala nag-respond.
Maganda na may transnational dimension na ito kasi may slavers. May slavers ka from another kingdom, ano? So may transnational. But within the Mai, may slaves. So it's not necessarily romanticizing of our pre-colonial past kasi hindi even, hindi equal yung past na yun. Diba? We need to acknowledge that because we're trying to be inspired by our past, but our past was a violent past. It had its own terrible things. I'm remembering Teng Mangansakan and the story of the Ayam. This is something that maybe Ibrahim should hear. Teng grew up Maguindanao royalty, I told you, and he remembers when he was a boy being given what he could not call a servant, nor even a slave, but a pet. And she was a Manobo girl. And she had no proper human name. She was called Ayam, which means poultry.
Chicken,
poultry. And they could do everything with her, with no consequence. They could ride her like a kalabaw. They could make her paso, like whatever, with embers. They could throw her down the stairs. They could do anything to her. And Teng had outgrown this, of course, and looking back, what a childhood, diba? And realizing that they were enslaving, the Moros were enslaving the Lumans. And they had a pecking order of which Lumans could be turned into ayam, or pets, and which could be turned into kasama. The poor Manobos could only be pets, or slaves. But the Mandayas, who are fairer, could be entrusted with, parang may racism na, di ba? May pecking order sila.
Naalala kong detail ng kwento ni Teng. They can also deform the pets para maging duck-like na wobbly.
His Teng's grand uncle owned a whole parang barn of ayam kept under the house na walang mga kneecap so they couldn't run away.
Is this, what's his name? Contemporary writer?
Childhood. So when he was an adult and outgrew this, got educated,
I'm sure, kasabahay niya dyan sa
may mga ayam pa rin. Sex slave na. Mga lalaking ayam na. Na walang mga kneecap. Ay, nag-gym.
Nag-gym pero walang kneecap. Walang makatapos.
Then, he's actually horrified about that part of his life and at least has consoled himself with the fact that the ayam was given to him by his mother, who later on set the ayam free. And as an adult, he was curious about what had happened to his own ayam and realized that she had been pulled out of poverty somehow when she got married and a child became an Rabayu. It's horrific. Our past was full of horrors.
It continues. Slavery is still.
Yes, of course. Trafficking and yung katulong lang na hindi mo properly sinisweldohan at walang healthcare, mga ganyan. About pero modern slavery na, may mga katulong pa ba kayo? Diba? To be truly sort of forward and egalitarian, ikaw gumawa ng sarili mo housework, no? Hello? Diba?
But sa probinsya kasi, tawag yung pas na utak alipin, maraming nagsisilbi na voluntary. I mean, hindi ko sila pinapatawag mo kung sila. Pero kung sila ka.
But it's your duty now to tell them if they don't owe you anything. So anyway, that's the complexity of the work. In my opinion, looking at it, you did not beautify necessarily. It was not a wide-eyed vision of the past. No? It had its own horrors and darknesses. Yung mga adversaries dito, what are their motivations normally? With the villains. There must be villains because it's YA.
The villain is basically the local government. So the local government has accumulated massive debts and
corruption.
Are selling off its slaves to the users.
So medyo, see, a secondary world is still the primary world transformed. So it's a commentary on our own situation now. Christian, please. Okay.
I really like the short poems, yung ambahan na section.
Do you think the novels can have more of those intertexts? What other things can you put there other than the ambahan? The local literary forms natin? Buktong, do you have buktong?
Yes, perhaps something more lyric.
Lyrical buktong, you have buktong.
That's the first book.
Yung ambahan mo ba original o kay Anton Fust ba?
I corrected the grammar of. Basically, it's the same. Matching of images. So it's.
So gumawa ka na ng sarili mo.
Medyo mas oppressive yung di ba, yung mga ambahan sa actual existing. Parang ang babae ay parang papag na pag madalas mong higaan, lalong sumasarap. So I decided to create my own. Napaka-misogyny.
Sa akin sa ethics, yung details na becomes part of the narrative quest. Nga yung cubic hair sa
ang barukay
or yung puso nasa somewhere sa ibang bahagi ng so yung kailangan yung patayin para
Yung puso na nasa loob ng itlog na nasa isang golden lion.
Right. So baka gusto mo rin i-harness yung klaseng imagination sa epic para on one hand whimsical, pero on the other hand, it really is a crucial trope to sustain the narrative quest. So isa yun. Yung pangalawa ay katulad ni Jimmy ay medyo static din sa akin yung chapters. So baka pwedeng pag-aralan mo din yung Rizal model na built-in sa bawat chapter. So may mini quest, mini unfolding of the story. Ang ginawa ni Rizal, maraming characters, building blocks siya towards a grander statement about the nation. At yun yung third point ko siguro ay since this is a novel and harnesses things from the past and brings them forward to a new generation of readers, then what does aside from
specificity yung binuong mundo. Ayun. So baka ma-free yung project doon sila ng place and sequel at mas makapag-relate, no? Dun sa mas sa philosophy na mas na-inspire siguro or na-enrich ng indigenous cosmologies. Tapos yun sa maganda yung binanggit ko dun sa Copperfield. Kasi pag yung mga issues na yung tungkol sa accountability ng ninuno, yung issue ng Sandro Marcos, halimbawa kay Clara Balaguer, o halimbawa yung mga descendants ng mga Visayan settlers sa Manila. Parang dating pinaka-up sa akin na analogy to interrogate yung ganong accountability na minamana beyond individual agency, beyond individual constitution, ay original sin. So ganda-ganda ng ganda-ganda ng sa copper plate na nag-accumulate yung debt. At walang inosente na brood, na offspring. Tapos sa UIA, napaka-paramount ng notion ng destiny at yung pag-free ng individual agency dun sa ano. So ang ganda ng tension na yun na
I think Cupcake has a lot of assignment. This will take you how many years? A couple of years?
Mabilis siya magsulat. Mabilis siya magsulat.
It takes, the first novel took me 6 weeks.
Paano dollars ranking?
Singapore dollars.
Since I'm not expected to give this manuscript until next week. So,
Are you assured how many books are in the deal?
Meron lang silang right for refusal. Yung nasa contract ko.
So,
Sa regular.
pag hindi na nagbumenta.
I can sell.
Pag hindi maganda yung sales ng first book mo, wala ka ng chance eh. Yun yung sabihin nun.
Magaling ka ng itlog dyan sa Santa Clara.
Ano ka na, magpadasal ka na sa lahat ng mabaylan.
Pero may tanong ako, kasi yung ginamit kong Tagalog pa rin ako. Tentacle kasi yung gusto kong term. Di ba gaway? Gaway. Gaway is tentacle in Tagalog. Kasi di ba yung joke? Kasi tentacle yung cuttlefish. So, pero hindi siya mag-work kasi pag
wala na yung
hindi kong maaram yung gagamitin kong term.
Pero pag English siya, mga gaway pa rin talaga ng English.
Ba't hindi lang
So ano
gaway?
yung footnote mo, explain.
Mag-describe mo once, tapos siya, gawin na ako.
Did you say that this was a Karay Hours pa? Or
No, hindi nga siya kinaraya.
Hindi nga parang ano na siya, canvassing the whole mythological life of the country na eh. Ano na siya, cherry picking ka na.
Cherry picking.
Oo. Kung ano yung type mo lang.
Paratilist na wala tayo share.
Oo nga.
Teresa.
Duhat picking. No, pero yun na. Hindi ko na siya sa-subject to standards of authenticity talaga. I've seen too many things na on TV na mga pangit, na mga baghari, mga bayan.
Step yung toes committing the same mistake. So ako, mag-reinvent ka na talaga.
Hindi naman, wala namang care yung international audience, hindi nila inauthentic na.
Pero sa atin, syempre, the social media
hindi naman tayo kasi mayaman, hindi tayo bigyan ng libro. This is for personal readers.
Gusto natin mabasa. Tagal pa yung film version.
Ang dami ma-address na ethical issues ng pagpalit ng
Oo, wala namang baggage.
At saka, madali lang yung pagpapalit ng term. Actually, nirecommend na nga ng...
Go for it.
Gora.
Find and replace.
Nirecommend na talaga ng publisher.
You canvas terms from Swardspeak. Bongga yan.
Wala ko naman masyado ng query niya.
Halimbawa,
Composite.
Mag-get siya ng
Care naman nila yun. Swardspeak, di ba? Ano yung Anash, mga ganyan.
Mga barush.
Meron ako gustong itanong. Alam ko malayo yun sa project noon, pero si Eugene Velasco, sinulat siya yung anina ng mga wala siyang kaalam-alam sa mga badya. Nag-research lang siya. Pero nakabuo siya ng mundo. Batay dun sa research niya. Pag binasa mo yung anina, manitiwala ka na talagang...
Badyaw yung kinuha na ng ano. Wala pa nakabasang badyaw na reklamo. Nandito kasi si Miss Karay.
I'm sure
Miss Panay Bukidno nandito. Kaya... Yun yung risk na mararan mo talaga. Magda-IPs who are literate and who can come across your material will probably complain.
Hindi, kaya ko siya tinatanong sa kanya, merong isang spot di, pasensya ng kulit ko. Tignan mo yung page 205, nagbubugtungan yung dalawang tauhan. Sa mundo na tinako ako kay Lumpera, na lahat ay literary artists. Kasi alam nila yung ano yung lore, alam nila yung mga tungkol na yan. Pero wala yung dito si Marikit na the rhythm doesn't work for me. Parang sa akin, yung ganong linya, parang siyang intervention ng isang, yun, galing ka kasi sa lungsod, inappropriate mo yung imagination.
Couldn't she just be an exceptional person? Kasi you cannot naman essentialize everyone from that time. Marikit is an individual, in other words. She was not generic. She was an exception. She's a slave who can dare look at the tattoo in the eye. Kasi cross-eyed naman siya.
Pero the reason why the riddle doesn't work for her because she's cross-eyed.
Okay.
Diba yung ilong, pag tumikindan ka, lumilipat yung ilong mo. Eh dahil nga duling siya, kahit anong ikot niya ng gano'n, mali yung pinupuntahan ng ilong.
Yun.
Tapos yun na actually sa Tagalog.
Banlad yata ng isa lang.
Tagalog riddle.
Banlad ba or buling?
Buling.
Lazy eye ba or ano ko yan? Lazy eye or cross-eye?
Yun yung banda.
So, cross-eye.
One eye lang.
Kaya yung pitinin mo yan, kasi pinatay for looking at him wrong. Duling nga, siya wrong. Diba?
Yung cinematically hindi mo sa meduling. Technically as correct yun. Pag transform into a film, hindi maganda makakita ng duling. Tapos ay politically incorrect din na
gawing joke.
So, kailangan medyo usable mo rin down mga issues.
May mag-adapt yung dinay.
Mag-adapt pa naman yun. Mag-adapt pa naman yun. Ito na maharap.
Pag-villager 6.
Ay?
Dapat bumenta ka ng first book. Walang useless sa rito. Pag hindi nag-win yung first book, wala kang second book. All or nothing, pero nagsusulat ka na ng ibang books, no?
Yeah, fourth book na.
Akyawin mo yan ang books mo.
Yung first run, sabi nga.
Para mag-pretend ka na ako.
Ilang libong kopya ba yun?
Ay, hundreds of thousands. Millions nga. Global ang author.
May cover na, no? Nakita mo na yung cover.
Si Katrina Palio.
Can you show us the cover?
Ay, wala pa. Pero
wala pa.
Ano lang, kinontrata lang si Katrina.
Yung artist.
Medyo tinaga siya, friend, 22,000 lang. Pesos.
Yun na nga, medyo galing siya.
For a global company na Harry Potter distributes.
Slave labor.
Slave labor.
Slave labor.
Parang
Ano, reklamo pa yun, di ba? Sa presyo na yun.
Parang yung press na ito.
Triple naman ng UP Press.
Namura yung siyempre tayo, pero my God, this is a different company. Ilan ang print run? Ilang thousands?
Hindi ko sinulat ang
wala sa contract mo?
Ay, baka. Pero
sa lawyer mo.
Pinabasa ko Beba. Pinabasa ko Beba.
Hindi naman lawyer si Beba.
Sa States, pinakamaliit man ganyan is 10,000 units. 10,000 to make it cost effective eh. But yours is globally distributed right away. It's probably at least 100,000.
Ang royalties pa.
Kaya naman
15%. Konti mo na natin magkano sa utangin ko sa'yo.
They stated the minimum. It's 90,000 pesos or 15%, whichever is greater. So medyo okay na.
Singapore is in naman yan. 90,000 is how much? 3,000 Singaporean dollars.
Maayos sila mag-market.
Hindi. Pero sinabihan nila ako na, they will...
They'll push it.
I will have to go to school visits.
Alam mag-repackage eh. Makeover.
May stylist ka na.
Yung Twitter ko at saka Facebook ko may deadline na kasi by December, buburahin ko na siya. Kasi bawal na maghubad.
Pero
puro hubad pero mag-picture ko sa Facebook.
wholesome ka na.
Respectable title ka na. Bawal maglandi.
Or make another one na now.
Private.
Ibang level, kasi pera ang pinag-usapan. Kalimutan na si politics.